Hi, Nadia. I'm Sarah from the upcoming. A real pleasure to be able to speak to you today. How are you doing?
I'm doing well.
So maybe you can give us a brief intro to The Uninvited for people who haven't seen it yet. What can they expect going in?
So the story is about a couple with a young son who are getting ready to throw a party. And right before the party starts, an old woman shows up believing she's returned home. And it's sort of the introduction of this stranger into their lives, this woman who, has lost control of her own story, who has lost her sense of where she belongs in the world, where she lives, who she is, slipping in and out of time, becomes this almost like contagion. And she causes them to all, she kind of slowly and persistently, without intending it, upends their lives. And I think Walton Goggins had said something in a Q&A that is a great line, which she said, it might be called the uninvited, but it's actually an invitation to live your life more fully and in a more present way. And I think that is a great sort of encapsulation of like the zoomed out journey. I mean, obviously, for me, there's multiple storylines. There's the story of a marriage, there's the story of a lost older woman, there's the story of your relationship to time and the past. And but the fundamental story, the reason I wrote the film was the struggle of a middle-aged woman between her sense of self and herself as a mother and herself as a wife. The sort of collision in this one night of like sort of the impossibility of holding all three of those things in the same body successfully. That was really why I wrote it. And the
And
three women in that are pictured in the film or depicted in the film are almost representations of different aspects of the same person. The youngest one, the ingenue, has an enormous amount of social power and freedom because of her beauty, and she's not encumbered yet. She's not married. She doesn't have a child. She can come and go like the men from the domestic space into the public space. The middle-aged woman, our lead, she's stuck between the domestic world and the her former sort of public persona or external, I don't even know if you want to call it public, but like, it's the experience of when you become a mother, like your identity changes, your entire like motivations and your heart and the way you think and feel change. So she's yet to sort of integrate that new side of her domestic self with her former self. And then you have the old woman who is almost vanished from the world and from herself. So you have this, and they are all actors at different stages of their career. One coming up, becoming a star, the other one can't get work anymore, and the oldest one said, this is something I did, but it was in another life.
just reading kind of about the backstory of it, I believe, this character of Helen, this older woman, that sort of event of her turning up at the house, being lost, thinking she's at her own house, was a true event that happened to you and Walton.
Yes, which is
But
the
I
other thing, which is, if okay, I don't think I mentioned it, but Walton is my real life husband, so he plays the husband in this. Makes it very confusing, blurred lines, reality, not reality. This is an entirely fictionalized story, except for two things. And the one main incident, like you brought up, is that an old woman showed up at our house when we were having a party, believed she'd returned home. It was such an interesting moment for me because at the time I was writing a play about motherhood, and I was writing a very avant-garde play about women in like kind of almost like boxes on a stage, like totally disconnected from each other and lonely and trying to reach whatever. It probably would not have gone very far, but I was exploring this like conundrum of feeling like separated from everybody and myself. When we threw a party and an old woman shows up, and it was in that moment of connection with her that was so stunning and deeply emotional, because I felt that I was lost, she was lost, and here we were in a city that's sort of almost gone on without us. And so I, tried to find someone who knew her, and in her car, in her phone book. And it was like everyone's phone was disconnected. And it was like she'd outlived everyone that knew her. Like, where did she belong? Called the police, and the police came. And in this like moment of clarity, she held my hand and she said, "Thank you for being so kind." I was just so wrecked by it. And I walked back into the house, and the party had just kind of started without me, you know? And it wasn't like anyone had gone looking for me, you know? And it was really because people were so used to me putting my son down and falling asleep, or like, like I'm going to come eventually, or I'll come for 20 minutes and then I'll go, whatever. Like I had sort of taken myself out of the picture, and I couldn't shake this feeling of that connection with the older woman. How all of these people, how we're all headed to this place, of being old if we're lucky, who will be there with us at the end. All of those things, like the arc of mortality and the meaning of life, have always been the things that have obsessed me as a writer, but never more so than when I became a mother, especially a mother at 40, because I started to do the math and I'm like, oh my God, like I'm going to be 60 when he's 20. Like there's no time. And so the movie that's the other thing that it's truly about. It's me wrestling with this whole crazy unwinnable game for women, like have a kid early and then you lose your career, have a kid later, then you lose the time that you could have being a mother, but then you're a mother and then you can't have your career. And then all of those things, it's not like breaking news, but every generation that goes through it is trying to find a more sane, connected, and equitable way of doing it.
And it was interesting that you said there that you were writing a play before you decided to do the film. And I wondered if maybe that had also informed some of the look and feel of it, because maybe the fact that, it's one night, this one party sort of unfolding, almost in real time. And although they're sort of moving in between different spaces in the house and the garden, it is kind of, there's a confinement
Totally.
to it. And at times it could, the beautiful gardens there, but it feels maybe claustrophobic or
Absolutely. That's the whole mission of the film was, okay, I'm going to adapt this play as a film, but with the intention of doing this very intimate play in many stages and using the architecture of the house, which is a character itself. And it's also, thematically, the house as a defining structure of the family, of the role of the husband, wife, and child, and the intergenerational thing that has been lost, the living room that's sort of abandoned. Like, do they ever even use the living room, until the old woman comes into that space? So, but going back to the adaptation from the play to the film, what was so exciting to me was like, we shot this movie in 15 days for under $1 million. Okay. And so it was 120 pages of dialogue that had to be run and rehearsed in a way like a play. And we only could have pulled this off in such a short period of time if I did this approach, which was like, okay, let's use this alcove, and I didn't cover, like you typically cover in a scene, like close up, close up. I mean, it's like, okay, no, we're really picking this beautifully lit moment, but you see the actors get to really interact, but you're close, you're not like a stage far away. So it's imagine like, you know, it's an intimate play, but, and you're right. And it does move and it moves around, but I used every possible thing. Like I turned the bathroom into a mini stage. I turned the closet into the bedroom, the stairwell, and then intercutting that with this freedom of being outside in the party, being able to move, and then you come back into the house, because it is a lot about claustrophobia and it is about being trapped as in your role, whether you're the mom, the wife, the husband, or whatever. And, the women tend to be much more trapped than the men. The men are free to come and go. They come and go from all the different doors too. Like you didn't even know there was a door there. Like the husband, Sammy, comes through a door, was like, where did that door come from? Like you're so free to come and go that the house is almost porous. For her, the wife, the mother, it's like the Buñuel film, Exterminating Angels. Did you ever see that movie where they can't leave the dinner party? She literally has a rope around her. Like it's, a kid's game, but it's meant to have a visual subtext of like, she's being held inside by the son and this older woman now, and it's this kind of domestic caring, which is not an indictment of that kind of care. And it's not about, oh my God, like fucking cut those ropes and get her out there, but it is about like the impact of choosing to be that person on your sense of self,
I love the fact that obviously there are these sort of very poignant moments and are moments that can feel quite earnest, but it's also very funny and it's got this really satirical edge. I mean, I just love the banter between Rose and Sammy from the get-go, and it's like, oh, I just want you to show some emotion. Well, I am. You just don't want to hear about it. And then some really funny pieces. I think my favorite moments where he's like cutting the lines of cocaine with the bath toy. So did you have a lot of fun with that? Like not taking it too
I
seriously?
mean, I had to write it. I wanted it to be a comedy, for as long as possible before, because I want to, entertain you, and engage you and charm you and not ask you necessarily to like these people, but at least to want to spend time with them. And also, these are privileged people. I can't take them totally seriously. I have to like be aware of the sort of ridiculousness of a lot of their, superficial problems. And I just tend to really enjoy comedic banter. Like those are some of my favorite films. And so that's really what I wanted to do. But, the emotional punch at the end was the whole purpose of writing the movie, like that was the thing, that was the scene that I almost wrote first.
And what an incredible cast that you assembled. I mean, with Elizabeth playing Rose and Lois playing Helen, and I love the sort of chemistry they have, which is then very different from the one that Elizabeth then shares with Walton and with Pedro. And then I wondered if there was almost something even slightly meta about the fact that, Walton and Pedro, even right now, their careers are exploding.
I know it's bizarre.
And then kind of, later in their careers, when obviously for women, things are improving, but there is sometimes that ceiling. You hit 40, as Rose gets the call at the
I
beginning.
know.
You can't.
I know. I mean, it is really wild that Pedro and Walton are having Walton after Pedro, but having these similar later midlife, sex symbol, internet, and the and Elizabeth, who's so profoundly talented, is like doing a play in Pasadena right now. Which is not to say that she doesn't have other opportunities and she's doing an amazing play, but it's just true, like this idea of a later in life chance, it's just harder for women.
And in that sense, what do you hope people take away from the film? Because I guess, you can take it on numerous levels. Like you say, first and foremost, it is a comedy and you are following these characters and we are perhaps poking fun at them and how they're maybe so slightly out of touch with, regular people.
Yeah.
Or you can look at it, I'm a mother, that moment where she says, oh, I'm lonely because I miss myself, not even anyone else, really hits. And then, of course, there is the broader one, which we all have to face: aging and our
Yeah.
mortality,
Yeah.
whoever you are. So there's multiple levels you can read it on.
And I mean, I think you said all of the things that I hope you take away from it. And I do have to say that I'm so encouraged and surprised by, the young men that have loved the movie that have come up to me or, DM'd me or, whereas I may have thought that it's like sort of squarely in the sort of middle-aged female audience, or maybe, at least someone who loves a more sort of literary art house kind of film. And I've been so amazed at the people who are not of that target market or whatever, which I obviously didn't target any market, or just, wrote what I really was hoping to express. I think that the thing that is connecting is this idea that it is funny and it is a beautiful story. And it is a comedy in the truest sense because things end in a very restorative way. Death here is not a tragedy. It is what will happen. It's just how you die that matters. And it's that connection. And here is this old woman, lost and alone, doesn't know where she belongs, upending the world of people who are so superficially and vainly obsessed, and slowly reordering them, and they become like a makeshift family for her on the last night of her life. And they surrender to this. Is it a delusion that she lives here? Does it even matter? It's like when Sammy finally asks her to dance, she says, but it's a requiem. And he says, does it matter? And it doesn't, because that's all you have is that one moment. And so that's it. And I think that the journey of seeing lonely people find each other for a moment in time is very satisfying.
Definitely. And maybe you can say a few words about the shoot itself. I mean, I don't know how you manage directing your partner, whether that ever, maybe you just have a shorthand with each other or whether it sort of causes issues. But then I can also imagine maybe you were just like carrying on the party, after the cameras were shut off and had a few glasses of champagne. It seems like you must have had a good
Well, it
time.
was so hard because it was a night shoot for 15 days. So no, there was no party. There was so much exhaustion. But I've said this before, Walton is very easy to direct because he's so well prepared, and he has such strong ideas about his character. And for me, I had the cheat sheet of being with him for 20 years before. And so I've watched him prepare. I've seen him, the way he talks about different directors, all of the different directors he's worked with, and what feels good, what doesn't feel good. So, I was listening. So when it came time for me to direct him, I knew kind of like how to stay out of his way, but how to support him too. Every actor needs something different, or thrives in a slightly different environment. So I think that's what's really exciting to me. I love that about directing, is like kind of having to shapeshift around people and being very supportive, which is extremely satisfying when you see what is ultimately given, from that kind of an environment. And so, but yeah, it wasn't always easy. There were moments where I was like, this is the day the marriage ended.
And seeing the journey of the film, I know it premiered at South by Southwest to great acclaim, and obviously getting a release here in the UK in May. What's it been like following the trajectory of your movie?
I mean, it's been really interesting, and I'm very lucky that our financier and distributor have been like very patient with finding the right way to get this film out there. And it's very hard for small films to find an audience. And I think as it played through the festivals, it was really lovely affirmation that this movie has an audience. Yeah, so it's just, in this moment of getting a small film out, it's people like you, like being willing to talk to me makes a huge difference in letting people know about the film. And so, I feel like I have held this movie's hand through every screening and every opening and every festival, and I'm ready to just sort of let it go, out there, and hopefully it speaks to people and they enjoy it and it's meaningful. And I can't tell you how many people have reached out to me saying they think about it days later and it's really affected how they've seen their mother, their wife, their husband, their daughter, whatever. I could ask for nothing more.
And in terms of how it's fitting with your career, I mean, it's quite contrasting to your documentary film, The 11th Hour. And I read you'd also called it kind of an expensive therapy in a way, because
Yeah.
lots of thoughts you had you've been ruminating on. So, now it's out in the world. What do you think you'll do next?
Well, I have been a writer for a long time, and I have a number of scripts that I have written in the hopes to direct. And so I hope this gives me, a little bit more of a better chance at trying to get one of these made. And, I'm really excited to keep learning. I mean, it took a very long time for me to get an opportunity to actually direct something, and I hope it doesn't take that much longer the next time. And I am so profoundly grateful to be learning at this age, and so open, and in many ways, someone asked me earlier today, can you talk about being 50, and like how it feels, because the movie's so much about aging, and I honestly, I like everything about it. I would rather have made this movie at this age than, well, I couldn't have made this movie when I was younger because I wouldn't have understood this journey. But all of the other films that I had written, in many ways, I am so much more ready now as an artist and as a writer and as a person to take this on. I definitely love this age and everything except for,
And in terms of the fact that it is kind of making a bit of a commentary on, the Hollywood world and, how superficial it can be and how sort of arbitrary it can be. Do you feel like that's something that's shifting? I mean, something I've maybe noticed is there are more women taking the reins, whether it's people like Nicole Kidman, going into production, making sure she's supporting female directors. But, maybe those opportunities are still a bit too few and far between.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's changed for sure. I mean, 20 years ago when I was trying to make a movie and so close, so close, so many times, it was still kind of like an unusual thing for a woman to be directing a movie, and especially if you were trying to direct something that was also risky. Maybe like I was always writing more art house, less market, you're just asking for so many leaps of faith, that my male compatriots just got given a shot, and I would watch them just sometimes make a great film, sometimes fail, but keep working, and a lot of women, you just had to be perfect if you were going to keep working, and so I do think there's so much more opportunity. I mean, my God, there's so many female writers and women directing television, but I couldn't believe the percentage that came out recently. The best of all the studios, I mean, it was like 95% directed by men. The best one was 87% directed by men. So that meant even in the best case scenario, only 13% were directed by women. I'm not saying things need to be 50-50, but it's just an indication that it's still hard, But I also think that the movie covers a little bit of this, the hours of filmmaking are really hard if you have a child, like you be gone for 14 hours a day? I mean, Jane Campion famously left filmmaking for 7 years to raise her child because she couldn't do both, And it's really, really unfortunate that you know, the economics of filmmaking is one where those kinds of hours. I mean, maybe we just need to commit to French hours.
No texting outside work hours. Yeah.
Yeah, and just 10-hour shoot days and a walking lunch, you know. It would make it more possible, you know.
Thank you so much for sharing all that with me. Huge congratulations on the movie because I've really found it both funny and moving, which I think is like, great balance to strike. And I
Thank
can't
you
wait for
so
everyone else to
much.
see it. May, thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.